Welcome to the Compiled Podcast. This is a show where two programmers talk about anything and everything. My name is Nick Wu and will be the host of this podcast. In each episode, we'll have a topic, and the goal of the episode is to compile the topic down to a list of essential points for our listeners. Each guest will have their own list to compile, so then we don't always have to agree on everything. This week, we are joined by, as hinted in the last episode, we're joined by John. John, why don't you give us a little bit of intro of yourself?
Hi, I'm John. I just graduated as well in the same year as Nick and Brendan, who were on the previous episode. I'm going to be interning at Amazon in the fall and figuring out what I want to do post-grad.
Oh, cool. I didn't know about the Amazon stuff. I guess we'll talk about that in a bit. Yeah, so I think you just got back from Washington, right?
That's right.
Yeah. How was Washington?
It's a really great city. I really liked all the people I was working with. It was a good experience interning up there. So I'm going one internship right into another, sort of as a way to explore, what I want to do post-grad, trying to not jump into anything too quick.
Yeah.
So that's, where I'm at.
Yeah, that's very nice. I mean, it's very nice to explore all the possible companies around you can work with. It doesn't really, we don't really get that in the UK. First of all, there aren't many technical companies around here, so not many positions, and also it's harder for me to switch between jobs personally.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, but that's very nice. Do you know what part of Amazon you're gonna be working on? Is it okay for you to say though? I'm not sure.
I have no idea. I haven't had onboarding or anything. I know I'm in AWS.
Okay.
Which is exciting because I think this might have been one of your quick fire questions, but I'm kind of interested in the cloud generally, so
cool.
I'm excited to maybe explore that a bit more.
Yeah, and also an interesting fact: all of the MP3 files of the podcast is hosted on AWS right now, and I'm in the process of setting up the podcast as a podcast on Google Play, and
nice.
Yeah, it's under review now, and hopefully it should be out. It will be officially published when we upload this podcast. And yeah.
I don't know how much you talked about yourself in the last episode. I didn't get around to listening to it, but I'll just ask, how was the end of your undergraduate life? How was your last 2 semesters?
Nice. I didn't talk about this at all. I did a pilot episode. If you haven't listened to that, go check out. But it's mostly about, in that episode, I talked mostly about why I'm starting the podcast and not so much about myself. So to answer the question, I've just graduated as you, and so most of the summer I've been doing nothing, just chilling, and I'm starting my new job in September. In 2 weeks, I started as a software engineer at Google. So I guess my summer isn't as eventful as yours or Brandon's. So that's well, I did come up with this idea to do the podcast. So that's about it. Unfortunately.
Have you been continuing with your blog? I don't know if you've read that at all.
Yeah, that's a good point to raise. I have cooled down a little bit for the with the blog, partly because I haven't had that much technical material to write about, and secondly, I've been putting a lot of time and effort into this podcast, and also I've got another side project I'm working on right now. That is due this Friday. So a lot of stuff has been a lot of the time has been putting up on that, and it's gonna be easier for me to stick to a schedule after Friday, because that's the day we'll have to deliver. So and we're not ready yet. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was actually writing script this morning for that. Cool. So we have our speed run, which we did with Brandon last week, and I've changed the questions a little bit to make it a bit more inclusive, and there are 6 questions as last time. I'm just going to fire them off to you.
Sounds good.
Cool. So let's go. Question 1. What's your favorite programming language?
I don't know if I have a favorite, but the one I use the most is Java.
Mm-hmm.
That has been good for both. I haven't done many side projects actually in Java. I mainly use Java in my work, and I think I mostly do my side projects in some type of Node.js or TypeScript, something JavaScript based.
Okay, cool. So yeah, in the speedrun history, Java has been 3 for 3 for this question. So cool. So let's move on to least favorite programming language.
Probably a stereotypical choice, but probably PHP.
Oh yeah. I guess yeah. You're more. I think you're more into web programming than me and Brendan. I mean, you've done more.
I have a bit of a background with web.
Yeah, you've done more jobs. Not jobs, more work in that area as me. Yeah. So PHP. Any reason, or do you want to reiterate why? Mostly, PHP is hated. I mean, if anybody's using PHP listening to this, I have no bone with PHP, so don't hate me. Just saying.
The syntax is really ugly, and even though it's C-like, there's a lot of little things in there that are really ugly, and there's no consistency with the naming conventions. A lot of the times you'll see stuff where it's camel case.
Oh, yeah.
And in other places it'll be underscore.
Oh, yeah.
It's so much of an amalgamation over the years of random things, it's not consistent.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point. I remember when we were doing, because I did some PHP when I'm in NC, UNC. I did the what's the one that KMP taught, like Intro to Web Programming.
Yeah.
And that one's in the background. The backend is in PHP, and yeah, that's a horrible memory to have to remember. Cool. Let's move on to favorite operating system. So it's Windows OS, Mac OS, or Linux, or anything else.
Recently I've been using Mac OS a lot, and I really like it. Part of that, though, comes from the hardware that you get with Mac OS.
Uh-huh.
But in tandem, they're really good.
Cool. And I remember you were using a Linux system when I was there.
Yeah, right? So my personal computer, it came with Windows 10.
Okay.
And I really gotten sick of Windows. It's a bit of a pain for developing on, unless you're doing something Microsoft based.
Yeah.
So I tried switching over to Linux, but then I started getting a lot of issues with having my computer dual booted just because it's getting old. So I've actually switched back to Windows for my personal computer.
Oh, okay.
But I'll kind of end up, I think, talking about this a bit more later. But I haven't been working as much on personal projects, so I've been spending recently for the last 4 months or so a lot of times with my work computer on Mac OS.
Okay.
And I've kind of really fallen in love with that.
Yeah, because I think we had this. I don't know if you remember this. We had this conversation one day. Brendan wasn't there. It was me trying to convince you that Mac OS is better than Linux, and then yeah.
I'm still not convinced Mac OS is better than Linux, but the hardware you get with an Apple computer, which Mac OS normally runs on top of, is just incredible.
Yeah.
So it's a little hard to fight.
Yeah. Move on to actually just realizing I'm looking at the wrong speedrun questions. Oh, okay. These are the same ones.
You got the old ones.
So favorite text editor / IDE.
So when I'm doing web development, I use a lot of Sublime.
Okay.
For more integrated development, I really like IntelliJ, which I've been using recently.
Cool.
And of course, historically, I got to give a shout out to Eclipse. Eclipse used to be my bread and butter. I still use it sometimes, but IntelliJ is really nice if you can afford it.
I think in terms of doing Java, either IntelliJ, I mean, Eclipse has more. I think Eclipse has a fairly big user group because it's mostly free, and for IntelliJ, you need a license, and unless you work with an institution or some sort of university, you have to pay for that yourself, which is I think why not as many people are using it. Cool. So that's all of the technical speedruns. I'm going to some non-technical ones. This one might be a fading shot. Favorite TV show? I don't know how much TV you watch. That's the favorite show in general, like just internet shows or like Netflix, HBO, or whatever.
Yeah, I don't really have an immediate thought on that one. I haven't been watching as much recently. For a while, I really liked BoJack Horseman. That's a Netflix original. That's pretty good.
Okay.
That's maybe the first one that comes to mind.
Right.
Recently.
What was that one about? I don't have I actually don't have a Netflix account to this day.
Yeah,
so.
it's an animated comedy. It's got a bit darker humor.
Okay.
I enjoy it.
Okay. All right. I don't quite associate you with dark humor, but all right. I'll take that. Cool. Final question. What is your dream job?
That's a good question. I don't really know yet. I think that's why I've tried to explore more internships. Definitely something software engineering. But I do think the specifics of that matter to me. That's something I figured out.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that's sort of what I'm exploring. I think probably something cloud related. Something lower level rather than I have a background in web that I'm kind of moving away from.
Okay.
That's sort of where I'm at right now.
Yeah. We've actually I'm in a bit of a similar situation where I've done a fair bit of web development, and at the moment it doesn't seem as appealing to me anymore as it did like 5 years ago. So so I'm slowly switching out to other stuff, which I haven't quite figured out yet, unlike you. I mean, what part of cloud typically are you like most interested? Are you typically interested in, in terms of infrastructure, or is it more like, how do I structure my application to fit into a cloud architecture kind of way?
Yeah, the scalability problems are kind of interesting to me. And we had a class together about distributed systems.
Yeah.
And some of those problems where they're bigger architectural problems are interesting to me, rather than more algorithmic problems. I'm not as big into the algorithms as I am into the system stuff, where of course you still have some algorithms that come in, but designing big systems that are scalable and inherent in having a scalable project means it's a big impactful project that has a lot of users. So there's a little bit of a bias there to just, cloud projects tend to be cool projects that have lots of users.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a lot of really interesting technical problems there with the architecture of it.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I don't see. I mean, the state of the industry is. I think cloud is in a very steady pace of moving forward. I mean, there's not as much of an explosion as it did when it first came out, but still a fair share amount of time and effort is put in to. I mean, like even as a independent developer, sometimes I do some like just random personal project, and then you have to think about how to deploy it, and then you might want to rent one of these cloud solutions, either AWS or the Google Cloud, what's it called, Google Cloud Engine, or something like that. I actually really know about this. So I mean, it sounds like a very interesting area to work on and to explore further.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you're right that the big explosion of the cloud is kind of over with the core architecture, but there are all the things on sort of the fringes that still need to get built out. And then there's also moving to even more like abstracting away the hardware, with whether it's serverless with Lambda or I don't know if you saw just recently AWS announced their database, their NoSQL database just launched like a serverless architecture. I don't know the details of that, but there's still plenty of progress to be made.
Yeah, definitely. I have been attempted to try out some of the serverless architecture stuff. I've read a few interesting articles, but I haven't had time to really sit down and plan out a project to explore it. But I might do it, and that might make it into the blog. So, I think that's a pretty well said answer. So, cool. Let's move on to our main topic. First, we have this is a nice follow up on what we talked about last time with Brennan. It's still kind of related to side projects, but the topic we want to talk about today is when
should you quit a project?
So going in with this, when I first read the brief, I had no idea what to talk about. Personally, all I have done is not actively quit a project, but rather put it on hold and effectively just let it die in time. So I think, John, you have some very interesting take on how or what sort of mentality that goes into the project, and at what point you want to say, okay, it's not worth it. Let me just stop. Just quit the project. So cool. I think you mentioned something about a sunk cost fallacy. Can you just tell us what that is?
Yeah. So, well, actually, first, I kind of want to go back and just reference what you said, where you sort of put a project on hold and then just never get back around to it. And I'm curious if you've thought about this at all, about if there's anything specifically that, bars you from going back to it beyond just loss of interest, which is something in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like one of the, I don't know if you've thought about this, really.
Yeah, I have actually. And this is partly talked about in the last week's episode. So in terms of me putting a project on hold, and I will put it on hold in the first place because one, I've just lost interest, as you said, and secondly, which actually I think is a bit more frequent, is I get stuck into a technical problem which I don't know if it's solvable or not, and it might be so. Like I don't know if you've had this before. Like you can be into a random personal project, and then you got into a point where you're like, oh, this library that's critical to the system's actually not working, and I don't know if there is a replacement library out there, and so then I'm not, and then your mind goes in like, oh, but then I can't really fix this thing because I didn't write the library, so I don't quite know the inner workings. So like you get into this tricky mindset where it'd be like, oh, it's going to a point when it's like hard to move on, and also, as you said, like some of the mental stuff kicks in, and then what I did was I'll put it on hold, and hopefully someday a new library will show up and help me out, or like some sort of new approach will emerge in my life and show me the way. That's usually what happens with me.
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of the bigger side projects I've worked on have been more simple web projects where they haven't depended as much on sort of complex dependencies. I actually haven't run into that as much personally, so that's interesting to hear. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You kind of come up against a big impediment. And you sort of say, going back to the, we were going to talk about the sunk cost fallacy, where you put in time to this project and you hit some sort of barrier, in this case, and you just keep working on it, and it's maybe not worth the amount of effort it's going to take to be able to essentially rebuild some sort of complex dependency for your project. So you're better off just kind of letting the sunk cost of what you've done so far just kind of fallow. That's interesting.
I think that just about describes what my mentality was when that happens. I mean, the sunk cost roughly just describes it. So I've got an interesting question to you regarding this. Do you know? I don't know what the technical terms are. There was this thing in psychology that says, like, once you've invested something in, once you've invested yourself, your time and effort into something, it's harder for you to admit that it's not working, or it's harder for you to admit you should let go of it. I think it's a psychology thing. I don't remember the technical term, but so like when this happens, as you said, if we go along with the sunk cost fallacy, then what should happen is at some point you're going to be thinking that, okay, at this point, the time required for me to put in extra to make this go along, it's not worth. It's like it doesn't like it's not worth going forward. So then might as well just let the sink. And but another side, like another part of me was like, oh, I've already put in this much effort. Maybe if I work a bit more, that will break through. So how do you feel about these two different trains of thought?
Yeah, for me, when I think about side projects, something I've been trying to do more recently is think about, like, well, just because side projects a lot of the times aren't going to be some big, huge, like monetary success.
Yeah.
Or necessarily even, I don't know, like big impactful things. They're more about developing yourself and developing your skills. So when I think about whether it's worth quitting on a project, a lot of the times I think about, like, how much have I gotten out of the project, and if I continue, essentially sinking time into it, how much more am I going to learn out of it? And especially when you're trying to solve like a hard problem like that, is the cost of solving the problem worth the amount of time you're going to have to put into it?
Yeah.
Right? Because solving some big complex problem, one, if you're, like you say, sort of dedicated to maybe motivate yourself to continue working on it because you've already spent a bunch of time building up to it, maybe you'll motivate yourself to work through some really difficult problem that you wouldn't want to, maybe delve into someone else's library and figure out on your own. But also, maybe just delving into the library, it's going to be, so many times it seems like it's some dumb dependency thing where there's some, I don't know, like, they depend on some other library that then is out of date.
You start.
Right? And so you just go down this rabbit hole of this kind of worthless fixes, right? So it's trading off, is going in and debugging this and fixing it going to be valuable to me? And is the project going to continue to inform and improve me as a developer? Or is it worth just letting it sink?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very valuable point that you, like, when you are in this cross point, you do need to reevaluate how much you are going to get out of it. If you do crack it, assuming you do crack it, and how much time, like, you have to sort of balance, the ins and outs and make a decision that way. Another question that I've always felt is I've always felt what's the word? I've always felt a bit ashamed trying to like admitting or stating that this is a dead thing to me. I'm not going to bother with it. But in the side of me, like the other side of me was like, oh, it's this sucks.
Yeah. And I wonder when there's not as clean of a cut when you say, okay, I'm gonna put this project on the side burner.
Mm-hmm.
When there isn't as clean of a cut there, if maybe it's harder to start new projects in the future because you're like, I should really just go back to that old one that's on the side burner. Even though, like, deep down it's maybe not worth your time going back to.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I'm not sure I've really, like, so I've been thinking a lot about this, like, when to quit on a project thing because I've been fortunate enough to do a bit of freelance work over the years, and it's been on one of the projects about 4 or 5 years that I've been working on it. And I'm still, I still get pings from the small business owner that I was working with about, coming in and like, hey, can you, I'd really like this feature, or, I need someone to come in and help with this.
Yeah, I think that's
so at what point?
Yeah, that's a typical freelance trajectory in terms of project moving forward. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so you just sort of end up getting like stuck in the project, and you don't have that clean cut where you can then, once you have the clean cut, you can start picking up new projects without the guilt of the old projects kind of looming over you.
Yeah, I think that's I don't know. For me, it's I don't think. Well, there are projects where I'm just like I know it's not worth my time, or it's not going to work for whatever reason. I know it's dead. Then I have no guilt. The ones I do have guilt for is when I hit a brick or I hit a wall, that I like, and I think it is crackable, but I don't know. Like at the moment, or even now, I still don't know what to do with it. But like, intuitively, you feel like this isn't impossible, right? There has to be a way. And if I like being in that situation and saying like admitting that there isn't actually a way, and you have to just let it go. That to me brings more guilt than I know something that's definitely not beatable, like, or it's definitely not crackable, and then giving up that way. I don't know if you felt that way before.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I haven't, I think, had as much experience. Well, I think recently I haven't been as ambitious with some of my side projects. So recently I haven't experienced that as much. Maybe about 2 years back, I can think of cases where, you're working on a side project that's cool and exciting. And then the other thing is, well, this is vaguely related, I guess. So I'm just thinking about some of the side projects that I've done in the past, and you think it's cool and exciting, and you start just kind of jumping into it without doing research about what's out there.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the experiences I've had is I started on a project and not have pre-carved out sort of a path for myself, or set specific enough goals. So then I just throughout my day, will see, there's this thing that does something kind of similar to it. And then there's this separate thing that also does something kind of similar to it. And even though those two things are maybe distinct, and maybe there could be a clear path for the project, you kind of lose motivation because you're like, well, this part of it's kind of already done, that part of it's already kind of done. So there's not as much motivation when you don't have a more clear and well-defined path for what the project is.
Definitely.
And that can, wear you down and maybe make you want to quit on a project too early.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's not as good of a place to give up on. It's more you need to take a step back and reevaluate.
Definitely. I mean, one thing we should have mentioned in last week's episode, well, I guess it's a little bit contradicting. So last week when we talked about side projects, one of my points was try to start now, like trying to start as soon as you can. But in saying that, now I realize that as you just mentioned, like you don't need a completely laid out path, but what you need to do is you need to research on the stuff you are doing that to make sure that one, you are going to learn, or this is a experience, is going to be an experience for you, and secondly, it is viable to do the stuff that you want to do. Like, you can come up with a great idea, but it's totally like, in terms of technology, it's just not there yet. I used to have this friend, and we went to see a film, and he came back to me and was like, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if we have a glasses that turns every 2D movie into 3D?" So like part of me thinks, like, at that point, part of me thinks, yeah, it's definitely cool, and the more logical part of me was like, yeah, that's I don't know if that's possible, and if it is possible, it would have been developed by now, right? So yeah, I think yeah, definitely do your research, or do your homework early. It's helpful in that way. Sorry, we kind of went off a little bit. Yeah, so I guess in terms of do you have anything about, like, to deal with, like, the guilt that you felt after you quit on something? I get, because I think that was one of the things that stops people from quitting, because they will be like, oh, this goes on, like, with any sort of quitting as well. Like, quitting a job, you'd be like, oh, am I going to be looked down by my peers, by my friends? I'll be like, oh, why'd you have to quit? Or like, is it that bad of a job to you, or something like that, right? So
yeah, I think with sort of side projects, once, let's say you're lucky enough to have survived a lot of the things that we talked about last week with motivating yourself to continue on the project and getting it to launch.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you've finally been able to launch the project, and well, now the project's sort of turning more into a job, right? Because you have customers, or you have users.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it can be really hard to quit on the project, because there's sort of maybe an expectation by the people you work with to help, continue the project forward, because it's starting to actually sort of reach what you're aiming for.
Right.
And so that's, I think then you also need to weigh whether it's worth spending your time to continue on the project,
mm-hmm.
Sort of maybe from two directions.
Yeah.
And this is similar to what we talked about before. One is, how are you going to continue developing yourself by continuing working on the project? Mm-hmm. And, is the developing yourself, I guess, is really just broken down into two parts. That's developing yourself, mm-hmm. Like technically, and developing yourself maybe, I don't know, like financially might be the way to put it. Is there a potential for the project to be worth all the time you're putting into it if you're not going to continue developing yourself technically, right? Does it have, mm-hmm. like, the room to scale?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I've sort of been thinking about this a bit, because some of the side projects I've worked on, they don't really have the room to scale to keep me on as, like, a full-time developer, right? So I've just been thinking about, is this still worthwhile enough to develop me technically, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about when it comes to sort of the guilt around abandoning a project can be kind of alleviated, I think, by just not abandoning it full out. It's like quitting a job where you have to... Yeah, so I think when it comes to leaving a side project, it's a lot like leaving a job, except the side project, they won't really have the resources to replace you. And I think part of what you have to do is acknowledge that you are replaceable,
right?
And that it's okay to move on from a project, just like it is okay to move on from a job.
Yeah.
Once your time there has run its course. But I do think there's a bit of a responsibility, and you can help alleviate some of the guilt you have, mm-hmm. from being personally invested in a project, much more than you might be personally invested in the job,
Mm-hmm.
by sort of staying at least tangentially connected to the project. A lot of the times these projects you'll do with your friends, so staying connected with your friends that you worked on the project with, and then, you're replaceable, but helping find your replacement and helping maybe get your replacement up to speed, and just not necessarily having as clean of a cut as you might have from a job.
Right.
I think are good ways to maintain a balance, when quitting a project.
Cool. I guess the point is, if I've listened to it correctly, is to first let yourself know that parting or leaving or quitting the project is ultimately going to save you more time in terms of not wasting it into more stuff that's not going to help you improve as a developer. And secondly, quitting doesn't mean like completely cutting off with the project. It's possible for you to either hand it off to someone or just either hand it off, or even better, trying to help them get up on speed to take over the project. So yeah, so I guess that was the 2 points that you raised.
Yeah, I did, and I think I agree. Yeah, you basically summed it up really well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so we have talked a bit about like better ways or alternative way. Well, okay, that's not. So we talked a lot about how you can develop yourself,
mm-hmm.
or how you should think about how continuing the project can continue to help develop yourself.
Yeah.
And so I was also thinking, and maybe you touched on this last. Oh no, this was in your list of other points to talk about.
Yeah.
But sort of related, I was thinking a little bit about how there is also the trade-off of when you're developing yourself as an engineer, you're spending time that could be spent elsewhere,
mm-hmm.
and thinking about the trade-off also of not just thinking about side projects for developing yourself as a developer,
mm-hmm.
or, I've been calling it financially. I don't know if that's maybe the right way to put it, but, if a project has a road to success, it might be worth spending time on it, even if you're sort of not maybe learning new skills at the moment.
Yeah.
There'll be new things to learn down the road.
Yeah, I guess.
But then there's also...
Yeah, it all comes down to time management, isn't it? Just the time you're putting into the project. It's good. It's definitely improving yourself, but at the same time, doing this other thing could also improve you as a developer. So I think we have some of the examples down here which are trying to blog about it, like what I did. And also I found this to be rather interesting, which is I did this with one of my projects when it died. When I decided it's not going to succeed and it has to die, I wrote a postmortem, just be like, I'm sorry, this has to happen. It's not going to continue. But I listed all the reasons why it's not going to continue, and then I think more importantly, you want to list off what you have learned already so far. So then, this is not a complete waste of time. You've definitely gathered more insight into how to be an engineer or a developer better than when you started.
Yeah, definitely. And I think going back to, you described it as time management, which I think is a good way to describe it. Thinking about, one of the reasons that I've quit on projects before is because I just didn't have time for them. I had too much on my plate, whether it was, work or school or relationships or just, having fun with hobbies that aren't development, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Having those other things will help you be a better developer by having sort of the soft skills, right?
Yeah.
And just having your sanity by not, spending your whole day, working on side projects, right?
Yeah.
You might, need to ramp down some side projects to keep yourself from burning out. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's another thing to think about.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's the anxiety and the stress that can bring to you. I have had this problem very badly when the side project gets stuck, or I get stuck into some sort of project. It's I like I get cranky, and I get a bit cranky, and I also get I don't see things as positive as they might be. Like you start to look for bad things on like everything in your life, and that's something you do not want as a person and as a developer. So I guess at that point you need to, one of the things that quitting a project does for you is it definitely takes away some of that pressure and some of that anxiety. If you have already been suffering that for a while, it's not a shame to say, okay, I'm not going to work on this anymore, but in return I'll have, as you said, my sanity with me. So definitely that's a good point.
And I think that ties back a bit into some of the guilt stuff. I think there can be a bit more guilt when you quit for, some of these like fluffier reasons maybe, where it's not like there's some real impediment. You might feel a bit guiltier, but it is about like recognizing that sort of time management is really important. And long term, I think it can help you also step back and then think about, like, once you're less stressed, right? Think about where you really should be focusing your time into improving yourself as a developer. Sometimes you get too much in the weeds and you can't see, especially like with software engineering, the markets shift so quickly and the technologies move so quickly. You might also get stuck in some path and not realize, I'm missing out on this whole other thing over here that would be more valuable for me to be learning or improving my skills in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, once you've made the decision, try to think of the bright side of it, instead of being drowned into the guilt. Would be a good sort of rule of thumb. Cool.
Yeah.
I guess we are pretty close to wrapping up. So I'll move on to the to the goal of this, which I think we've pretty much just done. Is trying to compile what we just talked about in our main topic down to a short list of essential points. But I think we've sort of summarized things along the way. But we'll just do a quick reiteration here, to sort of wrap things up. So since Brandon did that first the last time, so I think this episode I'll do it first. So cool. I've got many points. So the first point is when you are when there's a thought of quitting in your mind, it's best to stop everything and reevaluate the whole situation to figure out what's the best way to do, and accept sometimes that things don't work out as you want them to. That's part of how life is, and trying to think of the bright side of things once you've made the decision. Don't get too drowned out into the guilt of being having to quit a project, and instead trying to focus on what it brings to you, in a positive sense of the word. That would be my short list. And I think did I steal most of your points already?
So I think you covered it pretty good. I really like your point about you said before about time management. It really comes down to managing your time to learn new skills and to do non-technical things, and using, like you said, looking at the bright side to get past the guilt and remembering that everyone is replaceable. So you can leaving a project isn't the end of the world, and moving past the guilt that's intrinsic with kind of having to give up on something can make it easier to start new things in the future.
Yeah, and also I want to hit on the replaceable point. So I think a good way to look at it is everybody is is replaceable, and also every project is replaceable. Like you can always be working on something else. So don't feel like your career or your self-worth is dies with the project. It's definitely not like that. So that's just something else I want to throw in there. Cool. Okay, before we wrap up, we also have this cool little section about pick and plug, which is something, which is a place where we want you to recommend something to our guests, to our audience, and that's just something you found out to be quite cool. It doesn't have to be technical, and we try to bring a little more of a closer touch to our audience. So, John, do you have anything that you found that's interesting that you want to recommend, or do you have your own website to plug or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't really have a website currently, but something that we kind of hinted at earlier, I was exploring a little bit with some serverless stuff, and it can be pretty cool to mess with. I was helping one of my friends move his little side project onto a serverless architecture, and it was an interesting, like I mentioned before, sort of architectural problem, thinking about how to set up the different Lambda functions and the different, serverless hosting and all that and whatnot. And it's also kind of cool to see sort of from like a DevOps perspective. I think inside projects it can be hard if you're trying to get a bit of a DevOps experience.
I felt that very painfully.
Yeah. So like messing with serverless is kind of cool because you do get to do a lot of DevOps stuff. And it's been cool for him because he had his side project that wasn't really bringing in much revenue, so it was hard for him to motivate himself to continue to host it because it was getting a little bit expensive to host it. Because he was getting enough traffic that it was getting a little expensive to host, but he wasn't getting any ad revenue because he hadn't been able to get that set up for whatever reason. So we worked together to move it to serverless, which was pretty cool, and it was really cool to see it cut his cost in 10th. So that was like, oh wow, I actually kind of see the value of this.
Oh wow, indeed, yeah.
And it was also a fun project. So I think exploring that is kind of cool. I'm not sure it's going to be like some huge big thing, but I do see the value of it, and I think exploring it is useful.
Cool. So definitely check out serverless architecture. I think the big ones are Amazon Lambda functions, right?
Yeah, that's what he did.
Yeah, I think Google has this equivalent, which I don't know what it's called. And also, I think I read there's a Node package for that as well, but I'm not quite sure if how that's gonna work in terms of hosting and actually getting published. But there's a Node npm package called serverless, so definitely check that out as well if you're interested. I actually have a nice pick this week. I listened to the soundtrack on about the Greatest Showman, so the film that came out this year. I had not seen the film, but I listened to the soundtrack on Spotify, and it was amazing. So if you have access to it, or any sort of musical streaming service, definitely give that a shot. It's very upbeat and very inspiring, and I sometimes crack that up when I was coding, and it turns out to be quite helpful.
So it's good working music too.
Yeah, so definitely also for workout as well. When you have to like really muscle down something, and then you have that beat in your ears, it's gonna be a good boost. So definitely check that out. And thank you very much, John. You've done very well as our second guest. I won't compare you with Brandon, but you know, I want to know both of you. You're very dear to my heart, and thank you very much for coming along. And hopefully we'll have you back again for another topic at some point.
Yeah, this is a cool idea. This is fun. Good luck editing it. Hopefully Nickel have done such a good job you won't know, but I cut out like 5 times there, so have fun with that.
Cool. I mean, yeah, we'll see how that goes, but yeah, some of this will save as bloopers. So when you get cut off, I try to narrate through some of it. So we can save that. Yeah, we can save that for bloopers.
You'll hear me a few times, just like crap.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's the end of this week's episode. If you have any suggestions and any sort of comment to what we just talked about, or you want to chime in, feel free to tweet me on Twitter. And also, if you have any topic you want to hear us discuss, or you want to be a guest on this show, definitely let me know. There's no shortage of guests to come along at any point. So thank you very much all for listening in, and we'll see you in the next episode.